Welcome, everybody, to the Baseball Blueprint Podcast, your home for all things player development, where we highlight some of the best instructors in the game. Today's a special episode. Today, you guys get to meet one of the first people I met when I started going to my first ABCA coaching conventions. This is Ryan Brownlee. Ryan, thanks for being on the show, man.
Cody, you got it, man. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be awesome. So, for those listeners who haven't met Ryan, this is a guy who, if you're wondering about anything baseball, this is a guy who's been in the room when the presentations happen, when the decisions are made behind the scenes. So we're going to get a lot of information out of him today, and we're going to try not to overwhelm him with how many questions we got. But let's lead off here. Ryan, how'd you get involved with the ABCA, and can you give us a little snippet of your coaching journey?
Yeah, I was kind of, I guess, grandfathered in because my dad and brother were coaches. And so that was my first experience. I think I was 12 when I went to my first convention. It was in New Orleans. We don't host it in New Orleans anymore, but that was my first one. And, growing up in the house of a coach, not that you take it for granted, but I think you do take some things for granted sometimes that not every kid gets to do that. But you're in the rooms with Dave Kylitz was our executive director, who his son Craig is now the executive director. But you meet guys like Dave Kylitz. I talk about Norm DeBryan all the time, who was at Arkansas. And so I kind of was brought up in it. And then I really didn't think I was going to get into coaching in college. And then just was fortunate that I had a couple classes left to finish. And my dad asked me to start coaching with them, and literally within like 2 weeks. And I think it happens to probably all of us that get the coaching bug. Literally within 2 weeks of coaching at Evansville, I was like, oh, this is what I need to be doing. And so it was just a byproduct of being in the coaching tree circle, and didn't really get to my first convention until my second year. I think I got iced in or snowed in for my first convention. So,
Oh, man.
back then it's changed a lot for us with the ABCA. Back then, it seemed like if you were going to the convention, you were going to sign up for your membership that year, and if you weren't going to the convention, then you weren't going to sign up. And so, when you look at the numbers from back then, it is about 1-for-1. So, however many people are coming to the convention, that's how many people we're going to sign up. And now we have so many different resources for coaches where we're going to be at 17,000 members this year, and not all of those people are going to come to the convention, which I think shows that we're doing it right for our membership, because people see value in it even if they're not coming to the convention.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, your network grows anyway just from being involved. But when it comes to just development personally, the access to the video archives and being able to reference those presentations that have happened in the past, and even an idea of what's to come is super helpful, right? You don't get blindsided by a, a group of presentations when you show up for the first time. You have a plan. And I mean, as coaches, we like to have plans. We don't want to just go flying by the seat of our pants, right? So the resources that you guys have developed thus far have been incredible. It's expedited the development of younger coaches for sure. And when you see the impact that these older coaches are now having, when the connections are growing, right? It seems like every year we get more and more members at the convention. It seems like an environment that it's not just growing, right? But it's developing. We're starting to see the information and the teaching processes that are at the forefront of the space being presented and highlighted at these conventions. It's not just eyewash, right? So it's something that it's tactile. We understand how things work now. We get a better idea. We have some of the best instructors in the game who are able to come present and share this information with the layman, right? So that's really one of the great values of that space. Now, as someone who's, again, usually our interactions happen either we're bouncing between the main stage and the youth stage. Is there a group of presentations or a presenter that you would say, man, they knocked it out of the park?
I I think I'm fortunate because I do run our Barnstormers events in the fall, and I do some of the state association clinics. So I get an opportunity to see a lot of people speak outside of our space.
Yeah.
And I am partial to the youth stage because I do run that every year. And so a lot of those people that you see on the youth stage, I have seen speak in some other form. And so they are vetted. And I really do like the main stage process that we have, because basically the fourth vice president gets voted in, and then it goes to third, and third vice president helps with the main stage, and the second vice president helps with the main stage speakers. And I think that's why we get a bunch of different speakers every year, because They're going to be from different geographies.
Mhm.
The second vice president might be a Division I person, but might not. Might be a high school coach, might be a Division III coach. So I think it does allow us to spread it around, and I think that's why you see it's different every year with our speakers. And then we do put a lot of work in on the hot stoves too.
Yeah.
And really, the hot stoves are probably the one thing where you need to try to get to the convention outside the exhibitors. And for anybody that doesn't realize that the reason that we're the lowest coaching organization as far as how much you pay per year is because of our sponsorships and our exhibitors, and that's the reason why we're able to keep it so low. And when you look at the combined membership and also convention, we are the lowest of any association out there. But yeah, that's the unique thing for us, is that we actually have member coaches that are getting our speakers for the main stage, and it is a big deal to get on the main stage. It really is. You get in that type of room where you have 7,000 seats. It is a big deal, but those guys know those coaches too. So I think that's where everybody gets vetted before they're allowed to come and speak.
Oh, and that's
And we
awesome.
do have a lot of people reach out to us, but again, there's a vetting process for who gets to come speak.
And there's value there too, right? We don't, as people are coming there to learn, we want to make sure we're giving them the right information, right? So you guys do a really good job with that. You don't see a whole lot of wires being crossed when it comes to technical notes and process. So kudos there. It's been awesome for the time I've been involved. So let's steer this now more towards your idea now, because again, you spent time in the college space. You're in a professional space where the emphasis is more on developing coaches and how coaches are developing players. What have the contrast been from your role as in a group setting with a team versus now you're working on this almost more professional side where you're kind of directing things?
Yeah, that's what I've relayed to people, because people ask if I miss coaching, and obviously there's certain parts about coaching that you do miss with the players, the one-on-one piece, but I feel like this is a one-on-one job in the baseball industry because you do have interaction with everyone. I'm interacting with professional coaches on down to moms and dads that are trying to coach their kid for the first time. So you do really feel like you have a larger impact on the game itself. And with all of our meetings that we have, and you're meeting with Division I on down to youth and travel, you do feel like you have a decent pulse on what's going on with the game as a whole, and you do get a 30,000-foot view of the entire industry, where if you're coaching, you're really dialed into probably your program and your players, as you should be. But now you get an opportunity to kind of see it on the broader landscape of the baseball industry as a whole, which I do really like that part of it. And we had almost 90 coaches show up at Northern Illinois last weekend. We had almost 90 coaches show up this weekend. We have 92 registrations for Mizzou. And I do really like our Barnstormers events as well, because it's a little bit of a throwback where it's a little more grassroots, a little more hands-on. The convention is the way it is. It's a large production now, but I do really like our Barnstormers events because we're able to get a little more hands-on. And I think it's more comfortable for coaches in that setting to be able to ask questions where they maybe don't always get to some of their questions at the convention.
Yeah, and it's so funny. Like you talk about the evolution of the convention, right? And again, I don't have the backstory on each event that you guys allow us to get involved with there. But one of the events that I found the most helpful in my experience was our rookie mentorship meeting that first night of the convention. That was incredible. And so that was the first time where I got to hear you speak. And I mean, I think Paul Blanchard was one of the speakers as well there. So can you give us a little bit of background about how long that's happened, how that came to be, and I mean that was powerful stuff, man.
And that's Paul's baby. Shout
Mhm.
out to Paul. He's not going to be able to make it this year. So Brad Stromdahl is actually going to be our moderator this year. Who's the coach at Georgia State, who actually, I think he played for Paul along the way, coached with Paul. I think that's our best thing that we do at the convention, because it is overwhelming. If you're a first time coach, we all went through it. And I think that's why it's a pretty large tribal community at the convention, because we were all there at one point. You get around that many coaches and it's your first time, you do, it's not imposter syndrome, but it is a little bit. It's like, oh my goodness, I thought I knew a lot about coaching, and I don't. But I really like that Thursday night meeting. And if you've never attended, and I would highly recommend, we have older coaches that show up at that still, coaches that meeting meant a lot to. because it is a way for us to kind of get the new coaches and the people that haven't been there and maybe make them a little bit more comfortable for what the weekend's going to look like. And then also you get a chance to interact with other coaches, and you're probably going to make some connections. And that Thursday night meeting, I think, is just a great way to kind of kick everything off, get our new coaches, comfortable with what's going on, and then hopefully they make some connections too, but also get their questions answered, because it's really difficult in the beginning when you get going. It really is. We've all been through it as young coaches, where it's really hard in the beginning because there is so much information readily available for you. It's a great time to coach, but it's also a tough time to coach because there is so much information out there where you can get inundated with it. And it is like drinking from the fire hose. But that's where you really have to try to just center in on one or two things, get one or two things out of it. With the videos now, you can always revisit. That's probably the biggest difference for me now. Back in the old days, you were just scrambling trying to take as many notes, and if you couldn't get to all the speakers, then you basically missed it because there wasn't anything available to watch afterwards. Where now I think it's much better for the attendees because you can really just focus, be present, maybe jot some notes down here and there, but you can always go back and rewatch this stuff other than the hot stoves.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is one of the unique spaces about the hot stoves too. Is and each hot stove has a little bit of a different operation path, right? I mean, the outfield hot stove is more of a panel. You look at the way the infield hot stoves develop now. It's almost like a Q&A that's kind of spread out, which is fun too, because then you kind of get your own little piece of the information. So let's see if we can get an exclusive here. You do not have to release this if you don't want to. Have there been any changes to the operation pathing of the hot stove, or any ideas that have been pitched for that?
Yeah, I think we're always trying to evolve and we're always trying to make it better. So those surveys that we do send out post convention, those are important because we are valuing what our members want. Um, you know, I think with the moderators, they've done a good job because I don't want to say, hey, you have to do it this way. I don't operate that way. I want them to have autonomy on what they feel like is the best because they've been in those rooms before. And so they've seen what works. And I do like that they are a little bit different with how they're set up. So it's not the same thing over and over. And you get so many presentations during the day that it really if somebody's going to invest their time to come at night, they need to come out of there feeling like they got their questions answered. And so that's why they are all a little bit different, because I think coaches value different things. And so we do give our moderators autonomy on how they want to run it.
Mhm.
Base running's been different every time we've done it. Infield, we kind of was like, okay, this is the last thing, so we can move the chairs around. People are like, well, why don't you do it for all? Well, we can't reset. It would be really
Yeah,
expensive to try to reset that room after each night. So since that is the last time we're meeting in that room, we can get the chairs out of there and do it. But I think that's a good way to end it too, because I just think that kind of caps everything off before the Sunday speakers.
for sure. And I think one of the byproducts of that rookie mentorship meeting, right? Uh, there was an emphasis on making connections and meeting people. And like you mentioned, in that space, that can be a little bit daunting for a younger coach. Maybe your connections aren't as broad. Maybe you're there on your own, right? I've been that guy. But through that meeting, you start to learn how to interact with people in that space, and then that carrying that into the hot stove environment where it's a little bit more laid back, especially the infield hot stove where you're floating, right? The connections you can make in that space are so vast. I mean, I've met some people that I would have had no chance of meeting that have pushed my career farther than it, to be honest, would have been had I not met those persons. So you guys creating that environment for young coaches and for those coaches who are still learning, it's been awesome, man. It's been an absolute pleasure being a part of that. So thank you.
And I think we've missed a little bit of that just with the amount of technology that there is out there. I think we've missed a little bit of that tribal mentality where the elders are teaching the new
Yeah.
coaches. That's what I was raised on. I was raised on being in those rooms with older coaches in tight spaces, in hotel rooms, in hallways, and the older coaches really trying to help to give back to the younger coaches. Now, as a young coach, you have to take that information and use it, where I think we've gotten a little bit of combative through social media now at times. I think it's gotten better.
Mhm.
I think pre-COVID, it was out of hand where people were just really going after each other. And I think COVID, in a good way, brought the whole baseball community together a little bit tighter. You still see some arguing, but not as much. I think people are handling social media better. It's a valuable tool, social media. It is. I think it's a way to create a community rather than argue all the time. I have not really been on Facebook in a long time because of that, because it just felt like people were fighting for no reason. Where I think you can have healthy confrontation, and as a young coach, you would see coaches have healthy confrontation, and then once they were done with it, they were done with it, and they were still buddies
Mhm.
afterwards. Hopefully with the rookie mentorship and some of those things, we can bring that tribal community back where the elders are helping the young coaches. But again, as a young coach, you have to take that information. No one's telling you what to do. They're just trying to help. Just know at the
Yeah.
end of the day, if an older coach is talking to you and trying to help you, they are genuinely trying to help you as a coach.
Yeah, and it's awesome. You mentioned the impact that social media has had on the space. Um, and there are some really good things that have came from that, right? We were able to challenge people's thoughts online, right? And for me, that's what I use my social media for. It's a journaling device to where, like, if I'm not on the right path, I want to know, right? And so use your network in whatever way you can, for sure. But that's a great space to have your thoughts challenged. And I think the transition that's happening now in the coaching space with the addition of that is you see a lot more evidence-based approaches, which I think is ultimately good for the game. And then you also see this really um, I don't know if it's a natural thing, but you see this really cool shift in coaching identity where we're realizing changes that we need to make from technique standpoints and from maybe information delivery standpoints, right? And now we have like the cognitive ability to say, you know what, I might have been on the right path here a year ago. Let me change what I was doing real quick, right? And so Sheets was on the episode a while back, and one of the things he was mentioning is like, to the people I coached for the first 2 years of my coaching career, I am so sorry. Right? We think we know it. And again, I'm guilty of this too. Um, and we can only teach what we know, right? But moving forward, and even in the teaching process, like giving the concession that, hey, this is something that is a fluid technique. This is something that is situation dependent. This is something we might not know all the details about yet, right? That process when you're giving the information is pretty healthy. I think from a player standpoint, they recognize that. And I think there's a lot of respect that comes out of that process.
But I also want young coaches to realize stay away from social comparisons on
Yes.
social media. I think that's where we get into issues because everybody's situation is different. You may have zero resources, so you're just trying to do the best you can with the resources that you got. You may have all the resources in the world, so you may have a little more hands on deck. So try to stay away from some of the social comparison piece out there because you're going to see everybody's best both on social
For
media for
sure.
the most part. That's why with some of the youth baseball content I'm videoing now, we leave the mistakes in.
Yep.
So I want youth and travel coaches to see that, especially when you're working with young kids for the first time, they are going to make a lot of mistakes. But I think from a social comparison piece, that's where you see some of the issues that we're having online now is because everybody sees everybody's best bolt, and just know that it does look ugly sometimes. It's not always going to be pretty in coaching, in life. It's not always going to be pretty. So try to stay away from that social comparison piece on social media too.
For sure, man. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome stuff. And so here's a question that I was meaning to ask. And I wanted to wait till later on in the podcast to ask this because it hits a little bit heavier. If you were speaking to a group of recruits, right? From a person in your position, you're not recruiting these guys, but they're going through the process. What can you tell them about the coaching community and how that world operates so that they have a better understanding of life in the game?
And it has changed a lot now. I mean, you look at with the transfer portal with NIL, the landscape from Division 1 has changed a lot. So from my perspective of when I was doing it, spring of 19 was my last spring coaching, to what it looks like now is probably a little bit different on their end because until the NCAA wants to put a few more guardrails on this thing, your team may look completely different from year to year. And I do feel for our college coaches right now because they're dealing with things that they've never had to deal with before. And so I think that's a hard one. And I think it's a tough one for recruits to hear is that there's no guarantees on this, but there weren't any guarantees in the past
Right.
either. It's just a little bit different. And I think that is one thing that all recruits need to hear is that there are no guarantees in any of this other than the type of work that you're putting in every day. And that's why finding the right fit is the most important thing. I still think that has value in finding the right fit. Now, what that right fit is different for every kid. And again, this is where the social comparison piece comes into play for kids trying to figure out what's best for them, because just because your best buddy is going to this school and they've committed already, that doesn't mean it's going to be the best thing for you. My path was really different. I got to take all 5 of my official visits. I was not going to Evansville. Nobody in my family wanted me to go to Evansville to play for my dad, and I ended up going to Evansville because that's where I wanted to go and that's where I felt the most comfortable. And ultimately, that worked out for me because it was my choice. And so when things did get a little bit rocky, as they always do, that's another good talking point for all recruits and parents. It's going to be bumpy in the beginning. It will be really bumpy. And that's why you have to check all those boxes off, whether it's socially, academically, baseball wise. You have to try to check all those boxes off, because if you don't, it's a natural reaction to be like, maybe I should have looked somewhere else.
Mhm.
And that's a natural reaction. But every college student, I don't care if they're an athlete or not, those first 2 weeks are going to be really rough
Oh yeah.
because it's brand new. But when you look at habit forming stuff, that's also a great time to be able to make really healthy changes, because your environment, they've done research on that. When your environment gets changed and thrown out of whack, you can make habit changes quicker. Now, those could be really good habit changes or they could be really bad habit changes. As we see with all freshmen in college, some of them don't always make great decisions when they get to schools. Now, some are on it, some don't, but that's from regular students to athletes. It's going to be a little bit bumpy there in the beginning. You just got to really roll through those first 2 weeks.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's why you see a lot of the players who thrive on the competition aspect um, really, really take off in that space, right? It's tough to be a hesitant type player and go have success early on, right? So to those guys listening, if you can go into that space with confidence, um, and again, I know it's not like a switch you turn on, right? But if this helps at all in terms of your preparation, people are nervous when they step in. That is not an unfortunate, or that's not an unreasonable thing to be. But you can go into that space knowing it's the same game you've been playing forever. The game doesn't change. It might be a little quicker, right? It might be taught a little bit different with your new coaches, but it's the same game. So when you get on the field, when you step between the white lines, there really is no difference. You just have to go and compete as hard as you can, and that gives you the best shot to hang around and have a great career. So, um, Rob,
I would say I would say find an upperclassman that has had success in the classroom and
sure,
on the field, and ask them about their habits.
yeah.
And also ask them what habit changes and routines changes they've made over the course of
Ooh,
their
yeah, that's a
4
good
years.
one.
I would always try to stress that to our freshmen of, okay, don't talk so much here in the beginning. Be a sponge, but you know who's done well on the field. You know who's done well academically. Try to surround yourself with those upperclassmen and ask them questions about things. I think it's a good point. And we always talk about inexpensive experience.
Yeah.
And that's in life too. Even as an adult, reach out to people that are having success in that space and ask them questions about how they got to that point. Ask them questions about their habits and routines. And not that you have to completely copy somebody, but there's somebody out there that has paved the way and has done some of the heavy lifting, where you can probably make it a little bit easier on your path because you can ask somebody who's done some of that heavy lifting before. And we've all made mistakes. That's I still make mistakes.
And it's
I've got a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I still make mistakes. Like, it's a continual process of learning, and then hopefully it gets a little bit easier. But I think life is just life's supposed to be hard,
yeah.
and the people that I pay attention to, that's more the narrative is like, this is what you sign up for. It's supposed to be difficult. It's not going to be easy, especially in the coaching space. It's built up to be difficult,
Yeah.
because I think part of it is you're trying to figure out who actually wants to stay in and who doesn't.
Oh yeah.
I say all the time, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And so it's set up to be a little bit hard in the beginning to see who actually wants to get through it. And I think it's the same thing for players. The game is set up to be challenging. So, you have to take that every day that you go into practice, training, games, to know that it's going to be challenging, but the challenge is the great part of it. I think that's what brings people back to the game of baseball, is the challenges to it, because if everybody batted 1,000 or you struck everybody out, you would get bored. And so the challenges that are set up in baseball, I think that's the beautiful thing about the game.
That's awesome, man. Wow, Ryan, that's electric, man. So wow. Okay. We're gonna end it on that, folks. That's some audio gold there. Special thank you to the Baseball Blue Book Network for partnering with the show. Thank you to Valley Sporting Goods for being a sponsor. Ryan, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on, man. Thank you.
Hey, Cody, I value our friendship, man. You've done a good job about reaching out. So I do value what you're doing in this space. I value that you're trying to get better. And that's the cool thing about baseball right now with the podcasting spaces. There's so many different and good ones out there. So I appreciate all the work you're putting into.
Awesome, man. Awesome, man. Well, thank you guys for listening. We will catch you next episode.